So amazing film, first off. Oh my, and it's nice to see it on the big screen. Like
Exactly.
the visuals, the music too. Like if you can put that music on Spotify, that'd be great. Because I'd love to listen to it. Honestly, it was so good. But yeah, I have a bunch of questions. Obviously, we spoke previously on the live stream. But I think my first question would be, the second time I watched it, I noticed a lot of underlying themes. Like for instance, the color, right? Like it was black and white, then moved to color and kind of the back and forth. I was wondering if maybe you could speak about that, kind of like your focus on having that color differentiation and what that means. Because I tried to interpret it my own way. I would be curious to see like what your initial thoughts were for that color difference.
So we had this feeling that much of it is to do with there's a massive element of mental health in this film. That's kind of basically what prompted us to make it in the first place. And for us and for our understanding of mental health and the work we've done and the accounts we'd read, it's to do with people's perceptions of the world, because the world fundamentally stays the same, apart from the changes around, but it's about how we perceive the world that really impacts, how we start engaging with it or changing our practices and methods of engagement. So the idea of colour, it was one that was, really made sense to us to kind of articulate that. It's the sense that there's a turning point often where suddenly the way you perceive the world changes, the way your mental state perceives the world changes, and that can really either send you one way or the other. And it was a really kind of a clear way for us to be able to articulate these two different states of what people were longing for during the time that this film was made and the period that this film was made about, and what the world might seem like to two people or to the same person experiencing it through these different states, how different types of interaction might colour the way you perceive the world. That you can still be functional in a world and it can still be the same pieces, but if it just fundamentally feels and looks different to you because of the headspace you're in, that was the way we wanted to articulate that.
Firstly, thank you for having us. Thank you. Good to see you again. I think for us, this is how we perceived the world in those days. Okay, for me, specifically when I filmed, when I was behind the camera, it felt black and white. No, even though it was saturated and sort of realistic, something felt very natural that this is the approach that we're going to take in post-production. And the question was, when do we add color, not when do we reduce? So for us, obviously, don't want to interpret for someone else's experience with the film, but for us, the second he meets our character, the other character, something goes, a bit different from what he expected. And for us, the real life, the color was love. And basically this saturation, the black and white, was a world that lacks love. And this is how we perceive lockdown. This is what we saw and what we felt, basically. So it felt natural for us.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing that. I totally agree. I think that's a really nice portrayal of the emotions people were feeling during those times. So I guess another question would be, on the message of hope. I know you obviously mentioned that, the pandemic of loneliness is something that often gets, forgotten about with the focus of, different elements. But I was curious, do you, and we can take time, for each of you, have any coping mechanisms? Maybe there's people in the audience who have experienced, loneliness during the pandemic or continue to. But I'm curious if you each have different coping mechanisms that can help, help influence and support that loneliness that people have and kind of steer them into a brighter future, brighter direction, brighter state of mind. But yeah, just kind of opening up for you.
Well, it's a great question, actually. I think just from the outset, we David and I met a couple of weeks before first lockdown. So, sort of awareness was during a very bleak and weird time. So for us, it felt natural to sort of establish our friendship and partnership with creating something, being into doing something, saying something, delivering a message, trying to be sort of a torchbearer of a very, very weird and disconcerting period of time in humanity. So for us, it felt natural to just be active, go out, feel like we're essential, we're doing something, we want to make a change, we want to make people aware of the effect of isolation on mental health. We felt like this is not something that has been discussed. So aside from creating visuals and music, for us it was important to have this mission. and to just keep pushing through lockdowns. And we filmed in between lockdowns and through lockdowns, and we finished just when basically our first a small screening, private screening, was the end of the lockdowns a year and a half ago. So for us, it was really, really important, I think, to be engaged with just creating at the same time, doing art and delivering a message, being on that route.
I think also, when in isolation, it's easy to develop unhealthy methods for coping. When I think about art, it's a gift that, that this feels like almost a natural process for us. And, making this film was incredibly cathartic and helped us process with a lot of what we were going through at that time as well. My mother's a psychotherapist, and so I've sort of had quite a lot of experience of, the discussion around mental health. And, she's a big supporter of alternative therapies, drama therapy, the different, less conventional ways of, I don't want to say less conventional because that makes it sound like it might be something other than, tried and tested methods, but these are really kind of well supported but underused and methods to kind of deal with things. And art is a great way to kind of process. That's primarily, I think, how I deal with, that's my coping mechanism. So it's almost, there's a version of this where, we really wanted to communicate that there were different types of ways to cope. It's not just the fact that there wasn't a dialogue going on at this time. It's also that sometimes dialogue is not the right way to address a lot of the issues surrounding mental health. Sometimes it's play, it's practice, it's experimentation. And we were hoping, with the lack of dialogue and the inclusion of music to kind of give that impression as well.
That's awesome. Such a great answer. I feel like you should publish that as a separate blog or article. I feel like people would get a lot of value from that. And I totally agree, the focus on kind of transitioning your negative emotions into something positive, like a creative outlet, whether that's music or your own website or something that's a creative solution that can use that energy for good, right? So I think that's awesome. But I know Jay has questions as well, so I'll turn it over to Jay if he has any questions for you.
Many questions have been asked, so I would say it's always good to watch this film again, because the theme of isolation and how we actually cope with the mental health, it's always been important for the festival that we run, for the element of diversity that this brings up to, but particularly for the sense of healing that I think we all need after the pandemic. There have been a lot of films about the topic of COVID, but none of them, I think, they're more stressed on the numbers, they stressed on the terrorism, psychological terrorism that came out of it, but not so much on the healing side, on the psychological healing side. I think we left behind the attention to the element of suicide that has been definitely sort of hidden there, because we were saying we didn't want to talk about how many people were feeling suicidal and they were actually committing suicide because we were afraid to instigate the thought of it into other people. But at the same time, the psychological terrorism of numbers escalating and people dying was always there in front of us. So I think films like this help us in a way to heal, and I do feel the song is actually something that help us get in that situation. So I know we asked this question already in the live stream, but I feel that some of the audience would like to know about the reason of this song being so long and sort of being, I would say, a long lullaby that allows us to rest at the end of it. So it's for either of you, whatever feels like more in tune to answer about the theme of the song.
Yeah, well, it's David's music, so he's going to elaborate. I would just say that for us, the music was it was a great comfort on set. Like, we were listening dozens of times of the songs in loop on location, because we were filming and we were using the tracks. So in a way, it's sort of like a meta. Like, we were using the tracks to work on the film, but also for us it was a big comfort, just being surrounded by David's music. So yeah.
The other side of the coin is, a lot of the topics we're discussing, we understand are quite difficult to discuss. And a big question for us was, when do we release this film? Is the world ready to talk about it yet? Do we want to just get on with it? Do we want to talk about other things? Do we want to watch comedies? And is this really the film that people want to see? And we thought that the discussion was one that needed to be had. But sometimes you don't just want to be talking at people, and music has this wonderful way of setting a mood and setting a tone. So you can actually, on one hand, be discussing really difficult topics, and at the same time just giving people a really soothing environment with which to experience that and to address those themes. So, you know, it was a discussion. The discussion for us was really sort of what is the right balance between music and what we're depicting on the screen. You know, is music the right conduit for this type of discussion? At which stage in the film are we? You know, is it right? So, you know, and you're right. At the end, it was kind of, we wanted to show this reveal, this black and white world, this thing that could definitely have happened and happened to so many people. And it was like, okay, well, how did we? And we went through a few versions actually of that final song. One that had far more percussion, that was much more driving, because, you know, we wanted to feel that, you know, there's certain elements you're looking at. Do we want to come into a climactic ending? We really want to drive this message home. But then we thought, actually, you know, for many people who are in this stage, suicide, unfortunately, becomes the only way out. And it is quite soothing. And that's the reason people commit to that act. I mean, it has to be remembered that it's not the only way, and that there are people out there. And you're right, the sort of psychological terrorism that was a byproduct of the lockdowns, a lot of it was in the way it was discussed. You know, we had this idea of social distancing, when really it wasn't social at all, it was physical distancing that was required. But wrapped up in that was this idea that we shouldn't be socializing at all. I know people found alternative methods online and such, but, you know, it's about showing that this is really how people process this type of emotion. People go through that. We were very close personally in our own ways to kind of going through that at that time. And forms of art therapy were our way out. Communicating with one another was our way out. Sharing these experiences and emotions was our way out. And so that was the sort of effect of music. We wanted to, again, show how people experience this particular emotion, but also at the same time, you know, show that there's another way.
For us, we felt like, I remember that I worked in theater a lot. I was composing music theater, and we felt like when you compose a soundtrack for a theater show, when there's dialogues on stage and there's a moment when the dialogue doesn't just not suffice, like it just reaches to a point when there's nothing more to say, a song should come in. So I felt like here that there's nothing to say, like we don't want to say anything, we just want to be surrounded by that sort of like celestial environment and experience of having music, because it's such great comfort and it's such a release for storytelling.
It felt like a way out to freedom of speech in a time where you couldn't really make a sentence without being cut off unless it's fitted in the standard of what it was supposed to be heard and said and told. And you're right about the physical and differentiating it from social distancing. It is definitely another topic that, you know, the film brings us to discuss, and the power of freedom of speech and how that we can find a way out to it if it is being somehow denied or pushed back in a time of when we have to think about nationally, but sometimes we forget about the individual is a member of the nation as well. So we have to take care of the single individual to make it work, because in the end, if you are happy, you are less inclined to commit bad actions towards the others, towards yourself. So taking care of your mental health in any way possible, heart therapy could be one of that, definitely. But it's also about how we convey this message around the people we have here. So it's how we carry on this message. I hope that watching this film tonight and, you know, watching it on Stream Author, online, people would actually get closer and think about differently. The more the pandemic becomes something of the past, we do perceive this story and we do understand it times ahead. The more we watch it, the more we rewatch it, we probably understand more what we discussed about today.
Awesome. So I think in the interest of time, we'll take maybe one question from the audience if there are any questions. Anybody? Yeah.
David, are you singing in the song?
Yes, I am.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Lovely voice. Would you like to sing? No, I'm joking. I won't put you on the spot. Yeah.
I also have a question for David. I know you from Get Up, Stand Up. I just wanted to say amazing congratulations. It was fantastic, firstly. And also, just on the topic of loneliness that we were talking about before, as an actor, how do you handle moments where you feel sort of lulls in your career, or when you're going from job to job or audition to audition? How do you cope with sometimes the instability of the acting world? If you have any advice, because I'm also struggling.
Okay, thank you so much for your words. I really appreciate it, and thank you for supporting theatre, directly after a pandemic, which was really key. So the sort of key to it is sort of what you see today. It's by finding collaborators. It's to never stop doing what you're doing. Daniel Kaluuya, lots of famous, very well-known actors. They all say the same thing. All artists say the same thing, which is actually it's not about booking the jobs. It's about doing the work. It's a sort of way of life, and the more you live that, then the more at peace you are with whatever course and shape your life takes. I mean, before we made this film, this is our first film, so it was a moment to really dive in. And actually, the film was made because people weren't working, which hits me even harder saying it now. But we were able to make this piece because people weren't working. Fortunately, there was some government relief at the time, and I was able to use some of that money to help fund this film. We were all pulled together, and the creatives that weren't working at that time, our hair and makeup, production staff, people doing costume, Isabel Eady, who is the phenomenal actress in that film as well. All of these people were out of work, and so were able to make this film at that time. And since then, that's almost been our blueprint for creation, is if someone is available, then we want to create films. That's why we're in the process of setting up our own production company, all of those things. That's really how people go about it. And I think that's allowed us to keep creating, even in the laws of work. So actually, you go into auditions, you go into the sort of formal side of the industry, incredibly enriched, incredibly alive. Yes, you're learning through your own process, which can sometimes be imperfect, but it's usually, I found even in the most imperfect productions that I've learned the most. You develop your own method. It makes you unique as an actor or as a creative in any area. So in order to sort of sum up, to really make it through those moments is to find whatever outlet you can find creatively that allows you to express yourself and increase that sense of artistic muscle. It might be writing, it might be music, it might be directing, it could be anything, but just continue to do it. And then secondly, if you can, monetize it. Because, and it's not easy to do straight away, but if you can do that, then again, that's your route in. Because the minute there's money going around and you can make money off whatever you do, other people become interested, and suddenly it's less about, that's where noise happens, and that's how things snowball, and before you know it, you've got your own series, like Fleabag, for example. So that's what my advice would be.
If I can, just another word. David mentioned this is our first film. It's not like we only established our sort of like universe and language that we form in the visual capacity and storytelling capacity, but also we felt like there's a mission here. And I think since then, every time we engage on a story, it sort of like naturally comes from a place of like making a change. So I think this film, it's our first film, so it was an amazing elevation to establish our collaboration, but it also sort of changed us as individuals. We both feel like this is the opportunity to tell something and to say something, and for us this film is a warning. COVID was one incident where the universe was so fragile, and people were, so disconnected from each other and forgot about the basic thing, which is communication, embracement, warmth. So, we live in crazy days even now. So I think for us, going back to those primal sort of like needs and saying, this is what humanity is about. So for us, establishing that language and the universe is a life goal, really.
Yeah, sorry. So what I was saying was this is why I love working with this man. So you asked, I would say make art, but in order to make art, you have to know what you want to say. So I would say, make sure you you engage as best you can. You have those conversations with people, because that will allow you to find where you stand or where you don't want to stand, and then that will in turn inform the art you want to make, which will then open the floodgates to whatever comes after.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the insights. I mean, I know for a fact you've inspired so many people here today, including myself. So with that, I just want to give a special thanks to yourself, David and Omri, for coming in. As I mentioned, very, very inspiring. And with that, we're going to continue with the next set of pre-screenings. And just a reminder, at 8:30, we have our awards ceremony today. But hope you're enjoying and looking forward to the next set of movie screenings. All the best, everyone. See ya. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much.